On a dusty road, an unexpected reunion changed the fate of two lives. She thought she had left the past behind, but the past was waiting with a shocking revelation. A simple gesture was rejected without realizing its hidden meaning. What seemed like a ridiculous lie was actually the beginning of a life-changing truth. Before you dive into this powerful story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and get ready to be moved. Emily Harrison never imagined she would return to this place. As the car advanced along the dirt road, each jolt seemed to remind her of how her life had taken paths opposite to these dusty trails. The last rays of the sun painted the fields that were once her family's pride with gold, now reduced to poorly maintained pastures and fallen fences. "We've arrived, Ma'am," announced the driver, stopping in front of the colonial manor. The century-old construction, once a symbol of the Harrison family's prosperity, now displayed moisture stains and windows with broken glass. The roof, partially destroyed, revealed the sky in some places. Emily took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The air had a different smell from the antiseptic environment of her office in New York City. The 38-year-old corporate lawyer, always impeccable in her tailored suits, clashed completely with the rural landscape. Her high heels sank into the soft earth as she walked to the porch, carrying only a genuine leather briefcase and an expression of displeasure. 3 days, she thought. In 72 hours, I'll be back to civilization. "Do you need help with your luggage, Ma'am?" asked the driver. "That won't be necessary," she replied curtly. "Return the day after tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Don't be late." She climbed the worn steps of the porch, where an elderly woman awaited her with a timid smile. Mrs. Dorothy, the housekeeper who had remained at the farm even after everyone had left. A relic from another era, just like everything in that place. "Miss Emily, what a joy to see you after so many years." "Hello, Dorothy," she greeted formally, avoiding the hug the woman tried to give. "Is my room ready?" Yes, I prepared. The usual one overlooking the creek. I even made that cornbread you used to love so much." "You didn't need to go to the trouble. I don't plan to stay longer than necessary." The disappointment in the housekeeper's eyes was visible, but Emily ignored it. She wasn't there to relive memories or nurture sentimentality. Her mission was objective: to resolve the farm's legal problems, sign the necessary documents, and return to New York, where a possible promotion awaited her. The property, the last material vestige of her family after the financial downfall that led her father to bankruptcy, was about to be taken by creditors. The interior of the house held the same smell of wood and coffee that populated her childhood memories. For a moment, she felt a tightness in her chest when she saw the piano where her mother used to play on Sunday afternoons. She disguised the emotion by adjusting her blazer and headed to the office that once belonged to her father. The paperwork, spread over the antique desk, demonstrated the gravity of the situation. Judicial notifications, debt collection requests, summons. Pleasant Retreat Farm, with its nearly 500 acres, was now worth only a fraction of what it once represented. Poorly utilized land, deteriorated facilities, and accumulated debts. How did we get to this point? She asked herself, knowing the answer well. Her father, too proud to admit that times had changed, had refused to modernize production. When competition and debts engulfed him, Emily was already in law school in New York, determined never to depend on land or traditions. A light knock on the door interrupted her reflections. "I brought some coffee, Miss Emily." Dorothy entered with a tray. "And there's someone who wants to speak with you. Said it's important." "Who would that be?" Matthew Sullivan." The name caused a whirlwind in Emily. Long suppressed images came back like flashbacks. Afternoons by the creek, adolescent. Promises, a kiss under the century-old tree, and a departure without goodbyes. "Tell him I'm busy." But he insisted a lot, said it's about the farm. Emily sighed, irritated. "Fine. Send him in." She adjusted herself in the chair and assumed her professional posture. Whoever this Matthew might be now, she would treat him as she treated all matters, with objectivity and emotional distance. The door opened again, and the past entered personified. Matthew Sullivan was no longer the skinny young man who worked as a helper on the farm. He was now in his 40s, with a face marked by the sun and eyes that maintained the same vivacious shine. He wore simple jeans and a plaid shirt, typical attire for the region, but there was a presence about him that didn't match the simplicity of his clothes. "Emily," he said, as if pronouncing a sacred word. "Ms. Harrison," she corrected. "How can I help you, Mr. Sullivan? I have little time." He smiled slightly, apparently immune to her coldness. Still as direct as ever, "I heard you came back to resolve the farm's problems." News travels fast in small places. "Yes, I'm here to finalize the sale of the property. Unless you have something relevant to say on the matter, I'm afraid I'll have to end our conversation." Matthew pulled up a chair and sat down without being invited, a gesture that deeply irritated Emily. "Actually, I have a proposal for you." "A proposal?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "I want to buy the farm, for a value above market price." The lawyer almost laughed. "And with what money, if I may be indiscreet? As far as I remember, you were the son of one of the employees. Unless you've won the lottery, things have changed, Emily. I can pay $8 million for the property in cash." The number made Emily straighten in her chair. It was practically double what she expected to get from the sale, more than enough to settle all the debts and still leave a considerable amount. "Is this some kind of joke?" Matthew took an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the desk. "Here's a formal offer. You can verify with your bank. The money is available for immediate transfer as soon as the papers are signed." Emily opened the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. The numbers were there, printed on letterhead from a major bank. It was real, or it seemed to be. "Where did this money come from?" she asked, unable to hide her suspicion. "I received an inheritance from a distant relative in Europe." "And you decided to invest everything in a decaying farm?" "Sorry, but that doesn't make sense." "It makes sense to me," he replied simply. "This land means something. It has history." Emily felt her chest tighten again. It was exactly the kind of sentimentality she had learned to despise. "History doesn't pay bills, Mr. Sullivan." "No, but money does, and I have enough to give new life to this place." Emily studied the man in front of her. There was something different about him, something she couldn't decipher. The Matthew she had known was a dreamy young man, yes, but always with his feet on the ground, aware of his limitations. This man emanated a quiet confidence that intrigued her. "Why now? Why you?" "Maybe I have my sentimental reasons too," he said, allowing himself an enigmatic smile. "Besides, I'm developing a project for the region. Pleasant Retreat Farm would be perfect as an operations center." "What kind of project?" "A sustainable agricultural complex, spring recovery, organic, crops, renewable energy. I want to transform this region." Emily laughed, this time openly. "Now I understand. You're one of those environmental dreamers. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but land here is for producing profit, not for ecological experiments." Matthew didn't seem offended. On the contrary, he remained calm. "Times have changed, Emily. Sustainability today is profit. And speaking of changes," he took another paper from his pocket. "Perhaps you'd like to take a look at this before making your decision." It was a printed article from a local newspaper. The headline read, "Multinational plans dam that will flood lands in the Valley region." "I don't understand the relevance of this," said Emily, returning the paper. "The dam will flood part of these lands within 2 years. The company is already buying properties at low prices. Many people don't know about this yet. When they do, it will be too late." "And you're telling me this because it would be dishonest to let you sell without knowing all the facts? The interested buyer will probably resell the land to the dam consortium for a much higher value later." Emily felt her blood freeze. If that were true, she was about to be deceived in a deal that could represent millions less. "How did you discover this?" "I have my contacts. Let's say I learned to move in circles that were previously inaccessible to me." Emily looked at the purchase offer again. $8 million was indeed a value well above the current market, even considering possible future appreciation. "And why would you pay more now, knowing this?" "Because my project specifically envisions alternatives to the dam. I can do much more with these lands than simply flood them." Emily stood up and walked to the window. The sun had already set, and the first stars dotted the dark sky. She remembered how many times she had stood admiring that same sky, dreaming of broader horizons, and now she had returned only to get rid of that place. "I need time to think," she said finally, "and to verify your information." "Fair," replied Matthew, standing up, "but I don't have much time. I need an answer by tomorrow night." "That's impossible. I can't make a decision of this magnitude in less than 24 hours. "I understand, but I have other commitments that depend on this acquisition. If you can't decide by tomorrow, I'll have to redirect my investments." It was clearly a pressure tactic, thought Emily, typical of corporate negotiations she knew well. "All right," she finally conceded. "Tomorrow night, I'll give you an answer." Matthew nodded and walked to the door. Before leaving, he stopped and looked back. "You know, Emily, you may have left here 20 years ago, but this place never left you. It's in your eyes, in the way you look out the window, in how your fingers touch the old furniture. Some roots are too deep to be cut." And then he was gone, leaving the smell of earth in the air and the echo of words Emily didn't want to hear, words that touched wounds she thought had healed. Lying in her old bed that night, Emily couldn't sleep. The room, kept exactly as she had left it years ago, with the same band posters, books lined up on the shelf, and even an old forgotten doll, seemed like a museum of a person she no longer was, or thought she wasn't. Matthew's proposal hammered in her mind. 8 million would solve more than the farm's financial problems. They would secure her future, perhaps even the partnership in the law firm she so desired. But there was something about Matthew's sudden appearance, the mysterious origin of that money, and the seemingly idealistic project that didn't fit. Who was Matthew Sullivan now, really? How had the son of a foreman transformed into a millionaire with an environmentalist discourse? And why did her heart still race when he was nearby, even after so many years? Emily got up and walked to the window. Outside, under the moonlight, stretched the farm that generations of her family had built. She thought of her father, a proud man to the end, refusing to sell even when everything was crumbling. She thought of her mother, who loved that land, with a devotion Emily never fully understood. And then she thought of herself, the daughter who fled to build a life of concrete and glass, far from anything that reminded her of failure or limitation. The girl who once promised a young worker she would return, but who left without looking back. That night, lulled by the distant sound of the creek and the chirping of crickets, Emily realized that returning to the farm had opened a door she had kept locked for 2 decades, and on the other side was not just Matthew Sullivan, but a version of herself she had abandoned, along with those red lands. What she didn't know was that the reunion with Matthew was just the beginning. The true story behind that millionaire proposal, and the secrets Matthew kept, would forever change the course of her life, challenging everything she believed about success, value, and belonging. Morning arrived with birdsong, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee invaded the corridors of the house. Emily awoke feeling strangely rested, despite a night of restlessness. She dressed with the same professional rigor as always, dress pants, silk shirt, and high-heeled shoes, as if she needed the corporate armor to face that place that insisted on pulling her back to the past. In the dining room, Mrs. Dorothy had prepared a typical country breakfast: cornbread, biscuits, fresh fruits picked from the orchard, and strong coffee. A feast compared to the hasty toast Emily usually consumed in her New York apartment. "You barely touched your dinner yesterday. You need to eat properly," commented the housekeeper, serving her a steaming cup. "Thank you, Dorothy, but I don't have time for all this. I need to check some documents before making any decision," she replied, taking only an apple and the coffee. "Speaking of which, you know Matthew Sullivan well, don't you?" The woman's expression lit up. "Of course, that boy is an angel. After your father, well, after Mr. Albert faced difficulties, it was Matthew who helped me keep the house standing. He always came to bring supplies, fix what was broken. He stayed around after I left. For a while, then he left too. They said he had gone abroad. He returned about 5 years ago, different. Bought some land on the other side of the valley. Doesn't talk much about where he was, but everyone respects him around here. He's helped a lot of people." Emily nodded, absorbing the information. Would 5 years be enough time to build such an impressive fortune? And why return to this backwater, having the resources to live anywhere? And this environmental project he mentions, does anyone know details? Oh, that's the talk of the region. He started by recovering springs on neighboring properties. Then he brought engineers, biologists, educated people. They say he's going to transform the valley into a model of sustainability. He even won an international award. The information caught Emily by surprise. If the project had international recognition, perhaps there was more substance than she had initially imagined. Mrs. Dorothy, can you get me the local newspaper? And if you know where the headquarters of this project is, I'd like to visit. The housekeeper smiled. The office is in the old administrator's house in the village. They renovated everything, and Joe, the delivery boy, should pass by soon with the newspapers. Emily quickly finished her coffee and went to the office. The paperwork was still on the desk, including Matthew's proposal. 8 million. A value that would solve all the financial problems inherited from her father, but something still didn't fit. Determined to investigate before making any decision, Emily took the keys to an old Jeep that her father kept in the garage. If it still worked, it would be her transportation to the village. To her surprise, the vehicle started on the first turn of the key. Someone had kept it in good condition all these years. The journey to the village awakened memories Emily thought forgotten. The path winding between hills, the old crossroad on the hilltop, the creek where she swam on summer afternoons. 20 years had passed, but the landscape kept the same essence, although she noticed signs of degradation in some areas: worn pastures, slopes with erosion, stretches of thinner forest. The village had grown a bit, but still maintained its quiet air. Some new facades, a bank branch that didn't exist before, cell phone antennas clashing with the landscape. Emily parked in front of what appeared to be a renovated colonial mansion with a discreet sign: Waters of Tomorrow Project, Center for Research and Sustainable Development. Upon entering, she was surprised by the modernity of the interior. What from the outside maintained traditional architecture, inside housed a contemporary workspace: computers, digital maps on the walls, young professionals moving around with folders and notebooks. A smiling receptionist attended to her. "Good morning, how can I help you? I'd like to learn more about the project. She hesitated for a moment. "I'm a landowner in the region." "Of course. We have an institutional presentation in 15 minutes. You can wait in the meeting room if you prefer." Emily nodded and was led to a room with large windows facing an inner garden. She sat down, carefully observing every detail. On the wall, certificates and awards confirmed what Mrs. Dorothy had said. One of them caught her attention. Goldman Environmental Sustainability Award, Biome Recovery category, granted to Matthew Sullivan 2 years earlier. It was a prestigious recognition in the environmental field, something Emily knew from having worked with some companies in the sector. "I see you're interested in our trajectory." Matthew's voice made her turn. He was standing at the door with a relaxed posture that contrasted with the corporate environment of the place. "I'm doing my research before making hasty decisions," replied Emily, trying to maintain her professional composure. "Sensible. Would you like to know what we do here?" "That's exactly why I came." Matthew led her on a tour of the center. He showed hydrographic maps of the region, explained how the springs were being recovered, presented data on increased biodiversity, and productivity on properties that adopted sustainable techniques. Emily, even reluctantly, couldn't help but be impressed by the level of detail and professionalism. "All of this looks very nice on paper, but how much does it cost to maintain an operation of this size?" she questioned, her pragmatic side prevailing. "Less than you might imagine when you have the right partners: universities, international funds, companies that need to compensate for their environmental impact, and, of course, personal resources." "Which came from this mysterious European inheritance?" Matthew smiled slightly. "You've always been perceptive. The money came mainly from patents." "Patents? When I left here, I went to work as an assistant to a German botanist. He studied medicinal properties of American plants. Together we developed some compounds that showed promise for dermatological treatments. He died without heirs and left me as partial holder of the patents. The royalties are considerable. The explanation was plausible, but Emily still felt there was more to the story. Before she could ask more, a young woman entered the room. "Mr. Sullivan, the certification representatives have arrived for the inspection." "Thank you, Marina," turning to Emily. "I need to attend this meeting, but I'd like you to see one more thing before you go. Marina can take you to the nursery and then to the lookout. From there, you'll better understand why Pleasant Retreat Farm is so strategic for us." Emily agreed, feeling increasingly intrigued. The young woman named Marina led her along a well-maintained trail that led from the back of the building. After a few minutes of walking, they reached an area where thousands of seedlings of native species were cultivated under shade screens. "This is our bank of life," explained Marina with evident pride. "We're recovering species that were disappearing from the region. Some of these seedlings already have a set destination. They'll recompose riparian forests and degraded slopes." Emily observed the meticulous work of the employees, many of them simple people from the region who had been trained for plant management. "And are they all hired locally?" "Yes, it's part of the project's philosophy. Sustainable development also means social development. Mr. Sullivan insists on this." They continued walking until they reached the top of a hill. From there, Emily had a panoramic view of the valley. Marina pointed to different areas. "Over there is the beginning of the recovery where we started 3 years ago. See how the vegetation is denser? And that bluish strip is the agroforestry systems we installed in partnership with small producers. But the heart of everything," she pointed to a distant spot, "is that region where Pleasant Retreat Farm is located. 7 streams are born there that supply the entire valley's water system." Emily felt a strange emotion forming in her chest. The property she had always seen as a burden, as a symbol of her father's failure, was now presented as a key piece for the regeneration of an entire region. "If the dam is built, what happens?" she asked, remembering the article Matthew had shown her. Marina's countenance darkened. "We'll lose everything. The ecosystem we're trying to recover will be submerged. Communities will have to relocate. Biodiversity will be drastically reduced. That's why acquiring these lands is so important to us. If we can prove the environmental value of the area, we can legally prevent the construction of the dam." Back at the project headquarters, Emily said goodbye to Marina and promised to think about the matter. Deep down, she was beginning to question her own convictions. The corporate world she lived in valued immediate results, profit above all. But here was a project that thought decades ahead, that considered the impact for future generations. On the way back to the farm, Emily decided to stop at the village's registry office. Her lawyer's instinct told her she needed to verify some documents before making any decision. The notary, an elderly gentleman who recognized her immediately, was happy to help. "Miss Emily, how you've grown. I remember when you came here with your father to register the farm documents." "Hello, Mr. Anderson. I need to verify some recent real estate transactions in the region. Specifically, I'd like to know about the properties acquired by Matthew Sullivan in recent years." The notary adjusted his glasses and typed some information into his computer. "Let's see. Yes, he acquired 4 properties since his return, all strategically located at the headwaters of the main streams. He paid a good price for them, above the market at the time, and there's something interesting, he's not the sole owner." "What do you mean?" "The lands are in the name of a foundation, the Waters of Tomorrow Foundation. He's the president of the board, but legally the properties belong to the institution, whose statutory purpose is environmental preservation. It's a structure that prevents future sale for purposes other than conservation." Emily frowned. That explained something that intrigued her. Matthew was structuring a project that would continue even without his presence. "And does this foundation have the resources to make an offer like the one he presented to me?" The notary scratched his head. "Well, I don't have access to financial information, but I know they received a significant contribution a few months ago. An international donation, according to records." Upon leaving the registry office, Emily decided to make one more stop. She went to the only bank in town, where she had maintained an account since her youth, practically forgotten. She needed to verify the solidity of Matthew's proposal. The manager received her with deference upon learning who she was. After some discreet inquiries, he confirmed that the Waters of Tomorrow Foundation did indeed have sufficient resources in its account to honor the offer made for Pleasant Retreat Farm. "The foundation is one of our largest account holders," commented the manager. "It has been moving considerable resources into regional projects. It's even financing scholarships for local youth to study environmental sciences and agronomy." Emily left the bank with more questions than answers. On one hand, Matthew's proposal seemed legitimate and well-founded. On the other, the magnitude of the project and the origin of the resources remained partially unclear. Back at the farm, Emily found a surprise waiting for her. On a table on the porch, Mrs. Dorothy had organized a lunch with typical dishes from the region, exactly as she enjoyed in childhood. And next to the table, an old wooden box that she recognized immediately. It was where her father kept personal documents. "I thought you might like to see this," said the housekeeper. "I found it while cleaning the attic. It has letters, old photos, and some documents that might help with your decision." Emily thanked her with a nod. After quickly eating lunch, she locked herself in the office with the box. Among yellowed photographs and personal letters, she found a sealed envelope with her name written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. The date on the envelope indicated it had been written a few days before he died, 3 years ago. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. "My daughter Emily, if you're reading this letter, it's because you've finally returned to the farm, probably to resolve matters I left. I know we grew distant over the years, that you built your life away from here, and I respect your choice. But there are truths I need to share before it's too late. Pleasant Retreat Farm is not just a piece of land, as you've always believed. It's the heart of a vital environmental system for the entire region. The springs that flow on our lands feed rivers that sustain hundreds of families downstream. In my last years, I understood the mistakes I made by insisting on outdated production methods. Vanity prevented me from accepting necessary changes, and that cost our family dearly. But something gave me hope. A young man returned to the region with new ideas and resources to implement them. Someone you knew well. He sought me out not to collect on the past, but to propose a future. He offered to buy the farm for a fair value, with the condition that it be transformed into an ecological sanctuary, a model of environmental regeneration. I initially refused out of pride, but he didn't give up. He showed me plans, brought experts, opened my eyes to a possibility I never considered, leaving a legacy greater than money or status. I'm too old to start over, but you're not. That's why, if one day he comes to you with a proposal, I ask that you listen not just with the sharp mind of the lawyer you've become, but also with the heart of the girl who once loved this land as much as I did. The final decision, naturally, will be yours. The farm belongs to you now. But know that my greatest hope is that these lands continue fulfilling their greater purpose, nurturing life, preserving waters, connecting people to nature. With love, your father. Emily let the letter fall on the desk, feeling a tear run down her face. Albert Harrison, the pragmatic and inflexible man she had known, had changed in his final years, and Matthew Sullivan was at the center of that transformation. In her pocket, her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from her office in New York, reminding her of an important meeting with clients on Monday, urban reality calling her back. She looked out the window and saw the sun beginning to set behind the hills. In a few hours, Matthew would come for her answer. And for the first time in a long time, Emily Harrison, the woman who always had clear answers and quick decisions, found herself divided between two worlds, two paths, two versions of herself. And, at the center of this dilemma, was not just the future of Pleasant Retreat Farm, but the truth about Matthew Sullivan, a man who seemed to carry far more secrets than a simple story of financial success and late environmental awareness could explain. The afternoon was painting the sky orange when Emily heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. From the porch, She saw a pickup truck parking in the farm's yard. Matthew descended with the same tranquility as always, now wearing a simple dress shirt and dark pants, a slight upgrade from the previous day's look, but still far from the sophistication expected of someone with $8 million to invest. Emily took a deep breath. Her father's letter rested folded in her pocket, weighing like lead. The hours she had spent investigating Matthew and his project had brought more questions than answers, but had also planted a seed of doubt about her own convictions. "Good. Evening, Emily," Matthew greeted as he climbed the porch steps. "I saw you were at the project center today." "I did my homework," she replied, maintaining her composure. "I also visited the local registry office and bank." A slight smile formed on his lips. "A lawyer to the end. I wouldn't expect less." Mrs. Dorothy appeared at the door, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. After serving, she discreetly withdrew, but not without casting a hopeful look at the two. "You've won her loyalty," commented Emily, taking a sip of coffee. "Dorothy is family. She took care of me when I fell ill at 12, remember? And she stayed by your father's side until the end." The mention of her father brought up memories that Emily was trying to keep under control. "I found a letter from him today," she finally said. "A letter about you and your plans for the farm." Matthew's expression subtly changed. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that wasn't there before. Albert was a hard man to convince, but when he believed in something, it was with his whole soul. "What intrigues me is how you managed to convince him. My father wasn't exactly open to new ideas, especially coming from someone he considered inferior." Matthew didn't seem offended by the frankness. "People change, Emily. Your father went through a lot after you left. The bankruptcy, your mother's illness, isolation. When I returned 5 years ago and sought him out, I found a different man, less arrogant, more reflective." Emily swallowed hard. They were talking about transformations she had never witnessed, a version of her father she had never known. "And why did you come back? With your education and resources, you could be anywhere in the world." Matthew stood up and walked to the porch railing. The sun had disappeared, leaving a violet sky dotted with the first stars. "Some debts aren't financial, Emily. I owed this land. It was from here that I drew my strength, even in the hardest moments. When I worked for your father, he let me use the library after hours. Books that opened my mind to a world I didn't even know existed." "So it's gratitude?" she questioned, skeptical. "Partly, but it's also purpose. I discovered in Europe that I had a talent for botany, for understanding natural systems, and I realized that my knowledge could make a difference right here, where I was born." Emily joined him at the railing, maintaining a safe distance. From there they could see the outlines of the farm under the rising moonlight, a landscape she had forgotten was so beautiful. "I read about your project, the awards you received. It seems impressive, but something still doesn't fit." She looked at him directly. "Why pay so much for the farm? Even considering the environmental issue, it's a value above any rational evaluation." That's when Matthew did something unexpected. He took a small worn leather notebook from his pocket and extended it to Emily. "Maybe this will help you understand." Intrigued, she took the notebook and opened it. It was a diary, written in a handwriting that improved throughout the pages. In the first entry, the date from 23 years ago and a still childish writing. "Today I helped with the harvest for the first time. The boss, Mr. Albert, said I work well for a 12-year-old kid. His daughter was there too. She taught me how to read the scientific names of plants. Emily knows many things. One day I want to be smart like her." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She flipped through a few more pages and found entries about books she had lent to Matthew, discussions they had about environmental conservation, dreams they shared during that summer that now seemed so distant. "You kept this all these years?" she asked, her voice betraying the emotion she was trying to contain. "Some roots we can't pull out no matter how far we go," he replied, using words similar to those he had said the day before. "That summer changed my life, Emily. It was you who showed me I could be more than the foreman's son." The revelation hit Emily like lightning. It wasn't just about business or environmentalism. There was a personal history buried in that millionaire proposal. Matthew, that was over 20 years ago. We were practically children. And yet, every decision I've made since then has had a bit of that time. I studied botany because you showed me the magic of plants. I learned languages because you said the world was bigger than this valley. And I came back. He made a significant pause, because I promised myself that one day I would prove my worth. Emily felt disarmed. The professional aura she cultivated as a shield suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of Matthew's raw sincerity. You mean you're buying the farm out of sentimentality? No, I'm buying it for its inestimable environmental value, but I won't deny there's a personal satisfaction in transforming this place that once made me feel I wasn't enough. Night had completely fallen. In the starry country sky, the Milky Way spread like a silver river. Emily remembered how many times she had looked at that same sky, dreaming of a different life far from there. And now Matthew was telling her he had found purpose precisely in the place she had fled from. "Did you read my report on the dam?" he asked, shifting the focus of the conversation. "Yes. It seems like a project with major impact." "It's the tip of the iceberg. The consortium that wants to build it already has plans to transform the entire region into an industrial zone in the next 10 years. Your farm is just the beginning, and your project would be an alternative. More than that, it would be a proof of concept. We would show that it's possible to generate wealth by preserving natural resources, not destroying them." Emily returned the diary to Matthew, feeling the weight of the decision she needed to make. The lawyer inside her said to accept the proposal. 8 million was much more than she would get in any other negotiation. But a deeper voice, one she had silenced for years, asked uncomfortable questions about purpose and legacy. "I need time to think," she finally said. "Your proposal is tempting, but it involves more than money. It involves decisions about who I am and what I value. I understand, but as I said yesterday, my deadline is tight. The dam consortium is advancing rapidly." "You mentioned you needed an answer by tonight," Matthew nodded. "It's complicated. I have a meeting with investors tomorrow morning. If I don't close the acquisition of the farm, I'll need to redirect resources to another strategy." Emily felt pressured, something she didn't like. In negotiations, she always maintained control. But there, under the starry sky of her childhood, and before the man who carried part of her purest memories, she felt vulnerable. "Give me until tomorrow morning. I need this night." Matthew seemed to weigh his options before responding. "All right, I'll be here at 8. He prepared to leave, but stopped and turned. "Emily, regardless of your decision, I want you to know that your father would be proud of the woman you've become. He spoke of your achievements with admiration, even if he never said so to you." The words hit Emily in a place she had kept, protected for years. The image of the proud father contrasted with memories of heated discussions about her future, accusations of ingratitude when she decided to leave. "How can you be sure of that?" "Because in his last years he became almost a mentor to me. And in our conversations, you were a constant presence. The gleam in his eyes when he showed news about cases you had won. It was the look of someone who admired from afar, without knowing how to approach." With those words, Matthew said goodbye and left, leaving Emily alone with the weight of revelations she had never expected to find upon returning to the farm. The night dragged on without sleep coming. Emily revisited corners of the house she had avoided the day before. Her parents' room, where her mother had spent her last years, the office where her father worked late, the now silent music room, with the piano covered by a dusty cloth. In each room, memories, some sweet, others bitter. The farm, which she had reduced to a mere asset to be liquidated, revealed itself as a complex fabric of intertwined stories. Hers, her parents', Matthew's, the workers who had lived there. Around midnight, Emily decided to do something she hadn't done since adolescence. She left the house and walked along the trail that led to the creek. The full moon illuminated the path like a beacon, dispensing with flashlights. The sound of running water guided her through the trees to a clearing where a flat rock projected over the watercourse. It was her childhood's secret place. How many times had she sat there to read, dream, cry? And it was right there, on a summer afternoon 20 years ago, that Matthew had shared with her his dreams of studying and seeing the world, dreams that she, the boss's daughter with access to books and education, considered possible, but which for him seemed almost unattainable. She sat on the rock, feeling the cold surface under her hands. The creek continued its uninterrupted course, as it had done for generations. Emily tried to imagine that water dammed, the valley flooded, all to generate energy for distant industries that cared little for the stories lived there. That's when she realized she wasn't alone. On the other side of the creek, a figure moved, among the shadows. For an instant she felt afraid, but soon recognized the shape approaching the opposite bank. "Can't sleep either?" asked Matthew, his voice echoing softly in the clearing. "How did you know I would be here?" "I didn't. I come here every night since I returned. It helps me think." Emily couldn't help but smile at the coincidence. Or was it more than that? "This place hasn't changed at all," she commented. "On the surface, perhaps. But the creek is shallower than before. The springs are weakening due to deforestation on the slopes. That's why we started the recovery work from the hilltops." Even at a distance and under moonlight, Emily could feel the passion with which he spoke about the project. It wasn't the superficial excitement of businessmen she saw in New York, interested only in greenwashing and public relations. It was something visceral, connected to the earth beneath their feet. "You really believe you can make a difference, don't you?" she asked, without her usual cynical tone. "It's not a question of believing, Emily. It's a question of trying. If we don't try, we already know the result." A comfortable silence established itself between them, filled only by the murmur of water and the occasional hooting of a distant owl. Emily realized it was the first moment of genuine peace she had felt in years. "You know what impresses me most," she said finally. "It's not your project or the money you've raised, it's how you don't hold grudges." "What do you mean?" "My father wasn't exactly kind to you or your family. I myself left without looking back after—" She hesitated. "After that summer when we grew close, many would be returning for revenge, not to preserve." Matthew crossed the creek on some rocks that served as a natural passage. In seconds, he was sitting beside her on the flat rock, still respecting an appropriate distance. "Resentment is too heavy a burden to carry for so long," he replied simply. "I learned that early, when I lost my mother. Anger consumes, it doesn't build." Emily felt an involuntary admiration grow. The dreamy boy had become a man of solid principles, something rare in the corporate world she lived in. "In the city, they always tell me I'm tough, inflexible," she confessed. "I've built a reputation on that. But here, faced with all this," she gestured to the landscape around them, "I feel small and uncertain." "Maybe because here you don't need armor, Emily. This place knows you better than anyone." The words touched something deep inside her. For so many years, she had defined herself by what she had achieved. Far from there. Honors degree, legal cases won, important clients. But sitting on that rock, with the creek of her childhood at her feet and the familiar stars above her head, she felt reconnected with a part of herself she thought lost. "What will happen to the farm if I accept your proposal?" she asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "It will be incorporated into the project as a core preservation area. The springs will be protected, the forests restored. The main house can become an environmental education center. But that, of course, depends on your decision." Emily nodded, absorbing the information. The night was advancing and the air was beginning to cool. It was time to return. Both stood up, but before they went separate ways, she asked one last question. "Why did you keep that diary for so many years?" Matthew looked her in the eyes, the moonlight reflecting on his face. "Because it reminds me of who I was, who I dreamed of becoming, and the people who made a difference. Some call it sentimentality. I call it gratitude." Each went their own way in the night, she to the big house, he to his property on the other side of the valley. But something had changed between them and within Emily. A seed planted decades ago was beginning to germinate again, defying the concrete she had built around it. Back in her room, lying in the same bed of her youth, Emily made a decision that would surprise the pragmatic lawyer she was in New York, a decision guided not only by the logic of numbers, but by the long-silenced voice of her heart. Morning arrived with the golden clarity typical of that valley. Emily woke before the alarm, after a night of surprisingly peaceful sleep. She dressed with care, choosing an outfit more casual than her usual corporate suits, a blue silk blouse and light-colored pants she had found in her old wardrobe, pieces she had left behind years ago. At 7:30, she was already on the porch with a cup of coffee, observing the property under the morning light. 20 minutes later, she spotted Matthew's pickup truck coming up the dirt road. He was accompanied, an older man whom Emily recognized immediately. "Dr. Mitchell," she exclaimed in surprise as she saw the family's old lawyer get out of the vehicle. "My dear," the white-haired gentleman opened a warm smile. "How good to see you after so long. You're still identical to the determined girl who left here to conquer the world." The old lawyer's embrace brought an unexpected wave of nostalgia. Edmund Mitchell had been a close friend of her father and had taken care of the family's legal matters for decades. "Sorry for the surprise," said Matthew, climbing the porch steps. "I thought it important to have Dr. Mitchell as a witness, regardless of your decision." Emily nodded, appreciating the professional attitude. Mrs. Dorothy appeared with fresh coffee and homemade bread, insisting that everyone eat before talking business. The small domestic ritual contrasted with Emily's corporate meetings in New York, where million-dollar decisions were made between sips of espresso and impatient glances at luxury watches. Half an hour later, they were gathered in the farm's office. Emily had tidied the old desk, organizing the documents she had found in recent days. Her father's will, property records, debt notifications, all meticulously arranged. "Before announcing my decision," Emily began, her professional tone naturally returning, "I'd like to clarify some points." Matthew and Dr. Mitchell exchanged quick glances before nodding. "This property is valued at most at $3.5 million, considering the land and improvements," she continued, opening a folder with recent appraisals. "Your offer of $8 million is significantly higher. As a lawyer, I need to fully understand the motivations." "I thought we had clarified this yesterday," replied Matthew calmly. "Partially, but there are still gaps." Emily turned to Dr. Mitchell. "Are you representing Mr. Sullivan in this transaction?" The elderly lawyer smiled at the formality. "Actually, I'm here more as a mutual friend. I helped Matthew with the legal documentation for the Rebirth project, just as I served your family for decades. I thought my presence would bring comfort to both parties." Emily perceived the subtext. The old lawyer was there to ensure no one took advantage of the situation. Neither Matthew from his position as a sole buyer, nor she from any sentimental vulnerability Matthew might have. "Matthew, do your investors know you're paying more than double the market value for this property?" The direct question made the atmosphere tense for a moment. "My investors trust my technical judgment," he replied without hesitation. "The value isn't based just on the land, but on what it represents for the project as a whole. The springs on this farm feed 3 micro-basins in the region. The genetic DNA of the native species preserved in the forest fragments is invaluable for reforestation efforts. Additionally," added Dr. Mitchell, "there's the strategic value. If the farm is sold to the dam consortium, the entire Rebirth project is compromised. It's a defensive investment as well." Emily absorbed the information, nodding slowly. "And if I decide not to sell?" she finally asked. "If I decide to keep the farm and seek alternatives for the debts?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Matthew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That would be your right, Emily. The farm is yours. But I need to be honest. The accumulated debts are substantial, and the dam consortium has already started buying neighboring properties. In a year, maybe less, they would be at your door with a judicial expropriation order. I could fight that in court. You could, and you would probably gain time, but at what cost? Years of legal battles, financial resources the farm doesn't have." Dr. Mitchell softly cleared his throat. "Emily, I know your competence as a lawyer. Your name has already appeared in specialized magazines. But we're talking about a consortium with deep political connections and almost unlimited resources. Silence dominated the room again. Through the window, Emily observed workers moving in the distant field, men and women who depended on that land for their livelihood, just as their families had for generations. "I have a counter-proposal," she finally said. Matthew and Dr. Mitchell looked at each other, surprised. "I'm listening," replied Matthew. "I don't want to sell the farm entirely. Emily, the project needs the complete area to—" "Please let me finish," she interrupted, raising her hand. "I propose a partnership. You acquire 70% of the property for $5.5 million, which is still well above the proportional market value. The other 30% remains with me, as a partner in the Rebirth project." The proposal fell like a bomb in the small office. Dr. Mitchell adjusted his glasses, clearly surprised. Matthew, for his part, seemed to be studying Emily with a new look. "You want to become a partner in the project?" he asked, as if he needed to confirm what he had just heard. "Exactly. Not as a passive investor, but as an active part. My legal experience can be valuable for the challenges you'll face against the dam consortium." Matthew stood up and walked to the window, looking at the same landscape Emily had observed moments before. For an instant, she feared she had made a strategic error, had shown more emotion than intended. In the corporate world, proposing a partnership where a direct sale was expected could be seen as weakness. "Why?" he finally asked, still with his back turned. "Why not take the $8 million and return to your life in New York?" The question was direct, no beating around the bush. Emily felt Dr. Mitchell restless beside her, as if the old lawyer was also anxiously awaiting the answer. "Because I discovered I can't simply cut my roots and expect to continue flourishing," she replied, surprising herself with her own botanical metaphor. "In the last few days, I realized that part of me always stayed here, and now that I'm back, I can no longer ignore that." Matthew turned slowly. There was a different gleam in his eyes. "And your work in New York, the promotion you mentioned? I can still be a corporate lawyer and participate in the project. In fact, my firm has an expanding environmental law division. I can develop a bridge between the two worlds." Dr. Mitchell smiled discreetly, as if watching an outcome he had foreseen long ago. "This would fundamentally change the structure of the project," pondered Matthew, apparently thinking aloud. "We would have to reconfigure agreements, revisit the governance plan." "Nothing that good lawyers can't resolve," intervened Dr. Mitchell with a wink, "and as it happens, we have two excellent ones in this room." A less tense silence established itself as Matthew seemed to reflect deeply on the proposal. Emily remained firm, although her heart was beating rapidly. She had put on the table an idea she didn't even know she had until that morning, an idea born during the night after the conversation at the creek, when she finally admitted to herself that she didn't want to completely break with that place. "I'll need to consult the other investors," Matthew finally said. "I can't make this decision alone." "I understand," replied Emily, trying to hide the pang of disappointment. "But," he added with a small smile, "personally, I find your proposal fascinating. A corporate lawyer with your reputation would be a valuable asset for the project, and the farm would continue, in a way, in the hands of the Harrison family." Dr. Mitchell clapped once, as if closing a successful negotiation. "Well, it seems we have the outline of an agreement. I suggest we draft a memorandum of understanding while Matthew consults his partners. We can finalize the numbers and details in the coming days." Emily felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief, excitement, apprehension, and something else she couldn't name. She had arrived at the farm 3 days ago with a single mission: solve the problem and leave. Now she was creating bonds that would keep her connected to that place indefinitely. "There's one more thing," she said, before they could end the meeting. "I'd like the main house and 5 acres around it to remain as my personal property, separate from the project partnership. I can use part of the proceeds from the sale to restore it properly." Matthew seemed intrigued. "Do you plan to return frequently?" "Maybe," Emily allowed herself a small smile. "I'm discovering that I need a place to call home, even if I spend most of my time in the city." The next few hours were dedicated to the preliminary details of the agreement. Dr. Mitchell wrote notes in his small notebook, while Emily and Matthew discussed practical aspects of the transition. The old tension between them had been replaced by a productive energy, as if they had finally found common ground where they could build something together. When the sun reached its zenith, announcing noon, Mrs. Dorothy entered the office to invite them to lunch. The old housekeeper could barely disguise her joy at seeing the three conversing amicably. "Your driver has arrived," she informed Emily. "He said he has an appointment to pick you up at 10, as arranged. He's been waiting for almost 2 hours." Emily had completely forgotten that today was the day of her return to New York. The car waiting for her represented her life in the city, meetings, deadlines, corporate disputes. For a moment she felt a pang of doubt. Was she really prepared to divide her life between two such distinct worlds? "Tell him there's been a change of plans," she finally replied. "I'll need to stay a few more days." Mrs. Dorothy's smile widened even more. "I'll inform him, ma'am, and I'll also prepare your room for a longer stay." When the housekeeper left, Matthew looked at Emily with a curious expression. "Are you sure? I thought you had pressing commitments in New York." "I do, but I also have a phone and a laptop. I can manage the most urgent matters from here while we finalize the details of our agreement." Emily paused, considering her next words. "Besides, I want to see up close this project. That will save my family's farm. Showing me the Rebirth Center would be a good start." The implicit invitation didn't go unnoticed. Matthew nodded, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "It would be my pleasure. We can go this afternoon, after lunch." Dr. Mitchell observed the interaction with the wise look of someone who has lived enough to recognize when something significant is beginning to bloom. "Well, it seems my work here is temporarily concluded," said the elderly lawyer, putting away his notes. "I'll prepare the preliminary documents in my office and bring them in 2 days. Meanwhile," he looked from Emily to Matthew, "I suggest that you two young people take the opportunity to rediscover this wonderful place. There are stories that only the land can tell." During lunch on the porch, with the view of the fields that now represented not just past but future, Emily felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The decision not to sell the farm completely and to become part of the project was risky, professionally challenging, and potentially complicated. But for the first time in a long time, she had made a decision that seemed to align all parts of who she was: the ambitious lawyer, the farmer's daughter, the girl who had once dreamed under that same sky. When they finished the meal and were preparing to visit the project center, Matthew handed her a small package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it." Inside was a seedling of a trumpet tree, with its small, bright green leaves emerging from her still delicate trunk. "Project tradition," he explained. "Each new partner plants their own trumpet tree. In a few years, they'll form an avenue that will tell the story of everyone who believed in rebirth from the beginning." Emily held the small seedling carefully, feeling the symbolic weight of that simple gesture. A new root being planted, a connection being reinforced. "Where should we plant it?" she asked. "You choose. It's your tree, your mark on the land." Without hesitation, Emily pointed to a location near the farm's entrance. "There, where everyone who arrives can see it." As they walked side by side toward the chosen spot, carrying the small seedling and tools for planting, Emily realized that her return journey to the farm had become a much deeper journey than she could ever have imagined. She had come to close a chapter of her life and instead was beginning to write an entirely new one. 6 months had passed since the decision that changed the course of Emily's life. Autumn tinged the hills of the valley with golden and reddish tones, creating a perfect contrast with the intense green of the areas reforested by the Rebirth Project. The farm's main house had undergone careful restoration. Emily had maintained the original architecture, but modernized the interior to accommodate her frequent visits. An office equipped with cutting-edge technology now occupied the former guest room, allowing her to work remotely for the New York office during the 3 days a week she spent at the farm. That Friday morning, Emily was on the porch, laptop open on the rustic wooden table, finalizing a legal opinion for an important client. Beside her, a steaming cup of coffee and a folder with documents from the Rebirth Project awaited her attention. Mrs. Dorothy approached silently, bringing a basket of homemade bread. "The engineers have arrived, ma'am," announced the housekeeper. "They're waiting at the administrative center." "Thank you, Dorothy. I'm just finishing up here and I'll go meet them." The double life Emily had built in recent months required meticulous organization, but she had discovered in herself a surprising ability to transition between the two worlds. From Monday to Wednesday, she was the relentless corporate lawyer in New York. From Thursday to Sunday, she transformed into the legal manager of the Rebirth Project and rural property owner. She sent the opinion by email, closed the laptop, and breathed deeply, appreciating the aroma of the moist earth after the previous night's rain. Her gaze rested on the small trumpet tree she had planted at the farm's entrance. In just 6 months, the tree already showed visible signs of growth, its leaves more vigorous, its trunk firmer. Like herself, thought Emily with a smile. 20. Minutes later, she was meeting with the technical team at the project's modern administrative center, installed in the old foreman's house. The meeting room had a large digital map on the wall, showing the progress of environmental recovery throughout the region. "The results of the latest water quality tests are extremely positive," explained the young hydrographer, pointing to colorful graphs in her presentation. "The springs in the north area have already shown an 18% increase in water volume and significant reduction in sediments." "And what about biodiversity?" asked Emily, analyzing the printed reports in front of her. "We've recorded the return of 5 bird species that had been absent for at least a decade," replied the team's biologist, a man with a graying beard and contagious enthusiasm. "And the camera traps captured images of a family of otters near the main creek. These are excellent indicators of ecological balance." Emily absorbed the information with a satisfaction that went beyond professional. Each achievement of the project represented a validation of the choice she had made. The decision to remain connected to that land, which had initially seemed impulsive even to herself, was proving more correct with each day. The meeting continued with discussions about the next steps of the project and the legal challenges they still faced. The dam consortium hadn't easily given up, and Emily used all her expertise to protect Rebirth in strategic legal battles. "The hearing in the capital is scheduled for next week," she informed the team. "Our environmental impact studies are solid, and the scientific community is on our side. I have good expectations." When the meeting ended, Emily went to her Jeep to visit the most recent part of the project, a nursery of native seedlings built in partnership with the state university, which also served as an educational center for schools in the region. On the way, her phone rang. It was Cynthia, her partner in New York. "Emily, sorry to interrupt your rural retreat, but a situation has arisen with the Montemagno case." Cynthia's voice sounded tense. "The client is threatening to hire another firm if we don't have an answer by Monday." "I sent the preliminary opinion an hour ago," replied Emily, keeping calm. "What exactly is the problem?" "He wants an in-person meeting this afternoon. Says he only trusts you for this case." Emily sighed, feeling the familiar conflict between her two worlds. 6 months ago, she would have cancelled any personal commitment to attend to a client of this caliber. Now, her decision-making process was different. "See if you can schedule a video conference for 5 o'clock. If he insists on an in-person meeting, reschedule for early Monday. I'll be in the office at 7. Are you sure? He's the most important client of the quarter." "I'm sure, Cynthia," she replied firmly. "I have a commitment here that I can't postpone." The commitment was the first official visit of children from the local school to the nursery. Emily had made a point of being present, not as a lawyer or businesswoman, but as part of the community she was relearning to be. As she parked the Jeep near the nursery, she saw that Matthew was already there, chatting animatedly with the teacher and a class of about 20 children. In recent months, the relationship between them had evolved from a cautious professional partnership to a solid friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. And perhaps, Emily admitted in her most honest moments, something more that they hadn't yet had the courage to name. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Emily Harrison," announced Matthew upon seeing her approach. "Besides being an important lawyer in the city, she is co-owner of this project and was born right here in this region, like you." The children observed her with curiosity. A girl with braids and bright eyes raised her hand. "Is it true that you lived in a big house like in a TV show and went away to the big city?" she asked with the characteristic directness of childhood. Emily smiled, squatting down to be at the child's level. "That's true. I was born here, grew up in that house you can see up there." She pointed to the farm visible in the distance. "And I went to study in the big city. But the most important thing is that I came back because I realized this place would always be my home." "And are you Mr. Matthews' girlfriend?" asked another boy, provoking giggles among the children and visible embarrassment in Matthew. "Peter, that's not a question you should ask," reprimanded the teacher, embarrassed. Emily laughed, feeling her cheeks burn slightly. "Mr. Sullivan and I are partners and friends," she replied diplomatically. "And today we're going to teach you how to plant a tree that can live more than 100 years. Who wants to learn?" The activity with the children occupied the next 2 hours. Emily surprised herself with her own patience and pleasure in explaining basic environmental concepts and showing how each correctly planted seedling contributed to the future of the region. At one point, while helping a girl secure a cedar seedling in the soil, she noticed Matthew observing her with a smile difficult to interpret. When the children left, Emily and Matthew walked side by side along the trail that led to the restored creek, a place that had become special for both of them in recent months. "You looked happy today," he commented. "I never imagined lawyer Emily Harrison with dirt on her hands and explaining water cycles to 8-year-old children." "Neither did I," she laughed. "But you're right. I am happy. In a way I don't remember being for a long time." They reached the bank of the creek, now very different from the silted stream Emily had found on her first visit. The water ran clear between banks protected by native vegetation. Small fish were visible swimming against the current. "I heard you turned down a promotion in New York," commented Matthew after a moment of contemplative silence. "Cynthia mentioned it when she called the office last week." Emily sighed, sitting on a rock by the water. The senior partner position. It would mean more money, more prestige. "And less time here," he completed. "Exactly. Choices, always." "Choices?" She threw a small stone into the water, watching the circles form, but this one was relatively easy to my own surprise. Matthew sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance that both had silently established in their relationship. "Sometimes I wonder if you don't regret it," he said, looking at the water. "If you don't miss the life you had before, fully dedicated to your career." Emily reflected for a moment before answering. "I miss some things. The constant adrenaline, perhaps. The feeling of always being at the center of important decisions." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "But I discovered there are other types of importance in the world. What we're building here has a meaning that transcends quarterly balance sheets or headlines in financial newspapers." A colorful bird landed near them, completely at ease with their presence. Emily observed it sip water from the creek before taking flight again. "And you?" she asked, turning to Matthew. "You never told me completely what you did in the years you spent away from here. I know you worked with international environmental projects, but I feel there's more to that story." Matthew kept his gaze fixed on the water for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different tone, more vulnerable. "I left here at 18, as you..." "No, I went to work on reforestation projects in the Amazon, then in Costa Rica. They were hard jobs, poorly paid, but I learned a lot." He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "In Honduras, I met an American investor who was impressed with some recovery techniques we developed. He offered me a scholarship to study in the United States." "And that's how you got to Berkeley," concluded Emily, remembering the information she had discovered. "Yes. I studied environmental management, specialized in recovering degraded areas. Then I worked for a foundation that finances sustainable projects in developing countries." He smiled, finally looking at her. "And I saved every penny I earned for years with a single goal: to come back here and prove that it was possible, to do things differently." "Prove to whom?" asked Emily softly. "At first to your father," admitted Matthew. "He always saw me as the foreman's son, someone who understood nothing about business or sustainability. I wanted to show that there was another path besides the traditional exploitation that was killing this land. And afterwards? Afterwards, I realized it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about doing what's right, simply because it's right. He picked up a handful of moist earth and let it run through his fingers. When I returned and saw the state the region was in, I knew this was where I should apply everything I'd learned. Why didn't you seek me out before? The question Emily had been keeping for months finally escaped. When you learned my father had passed away, Matthew took a deep breath before answering. I tried. I called the office where you work. The secretary said she would pass the message, but you never returned. I sent emails that probably ended up in the spam folder. He gave a melancholic smile. And maybe deep down I was afraid. Afraid that the girl I knew had completely transformed into the successful lawyer I saw in photos of corporate events. The silence that followed was loaded with everything both had left unsaid over the months. Emily felt her heart accelerate when she finally found courage for the most difficult question. And now? What do you see when you look at me? Matthew turned to her, his eyes reflecting the gleam of the setting sun on the water. I see someone who found their way back to themselves, someone who had the courage to question their own certainties and reinvent their life without abandoning what they had already achieved. He hesitated for an instant before continuing. I see the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. The world seemed to be suspended while their gazes remained connected. Emily felt the weight of all the decisions that had brought her to that moment. The decision to leave years ago, the decision to return, the decision to stay. And now perhaps the most important of them, the decision to allow herself to feel what she had tried to deny since their first reunion. With a naturalness that surprised them both, their hands met on the rock. The simple touch carried the promise of a new beginning, as full of possibilities as the seeds they had planted together. I think it's time we plant another trumpet tree, said Emily softly. Why? We don't have any new partner in the project, he replied, confused. Not for the project, she smiled. For us, to mark a new chapter. The sun was slowly descending behind the hills as they walked back to the seedling nursery. Emily felt a quiet certainty grow inside her, like the roots of that small tree she had planted months before, roots that were now deepening in the soil, creating invisible but essential connections with the land that had generated her. Dean. Her pocket, 3 missed calls from the important client in New York, flashed ignored. Emily knew she would have to deal with this eventually, that her life would continue to be a constant negotiation between two worlds. But at that moment, as they chose together a perfect yellow trumpet tree seedling, she had absolute clarity of where she belonged. From the porch of the big house, Mrs. Dorothy observed from a distance the couple heading to a specific point on the property carrying a small tree. The old housekeeper smiled, satisfied. Pleasant Retreat Farm had always been a place of cycles, of planting and harvesting, of departures and returns, of endings and beginnings. And now, finally, it was, experiencing its own rebirth. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Matthew's journey has touched your heart. Just like the roots of the trumpet tree they planted at the end of the story, we hope this narrative creates roots in you, reminding us that it's never too late to reconnect with our origins and reinvent our paths. To continue exploring stories of transformation and reconnection with nature, we've prepared a special playlist called Roots and Rebirths with equally engaging narratives. Find it by clicking to the left of the video. If this story about choices, environment, and new beginnings resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Each week we bring new narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships and our connection with the natural world. And how would you handle Emily's choice? What would you sacrifice for a greater cause? Share your reflections in the comments. Just like the rebirth project in our story, our community grows and flourishes with each new voice that joins it. Until the next chapter of our stories.